Tonight we're talking about the role and importance of fatwa. This is almost every Muslim have heard the word fatwas before. Tonight we want to have a little bit of understanding. This discussion is a little bit technical, and usually technical equal boring. But hopefully, and we have lost about 22 minutes from the class session, so I will try to speak a little bit quickly. I'm not sure if we will get through all the material, but if we don't, we can always pick it up next week. So let's first begin by defining what is fatwa. So a fatwa is the issuing of a non-binding legal Islamic ruling that has evidence behind it, and it's issued by someone who's qualified to do so in response to a particular question. So usually in our religion, we have, as Allah mentioned, that there's halal clear, haram clear, but there are many issues, modern issues, different issues that comes up daily in our lives. And oftentimes we are unable to find a clear ruling on what we are supposed to do. And so we would turn to our scholars, and they would go and research the issue, and they would take many things into consideration to come up with a path forward for us as Muslims. And so we have these people who are qualified to give fatwa. They're called a mufti, and the mufti has who is the one who gives fatwa, and the mufti has to have certain qualifications as well. We'll talk more about that, but for now, they have to be known to be an upright person, a person who has taqwa, a person who understands the religion and have knowledge about it. So this is very important aspect of being a mufti. The responsibility of a mufti when they get questioned is really, first of all, if you are a qualified mufti, then you need to know that when you issue a fatwa, it's a community obligation. It is an obligation that is placed on the community to find answers to questions that face the community. And so it becomes incumbent upon the mufti to respond, because fard kifaya means that there's few qualified people in the community. If they speak up, then the whole community is absolved. But if no one in the community does anything, then the whole community will be blamed. It's like janazah salah. If nobody prays it, everyone gets blamed. But if one or two or three people pray it, then the rest of the community gets waived and they don't get held responsible. So if there's a mufti in the community, then it becomes obligatory on him to answer questions that the community will ask of him. It's really important that the mufti, one of the problems with learned people is they give you too much information. You know, there's an information overload. And so the mufti has to be skilled that when he's answering the question, answer the specific question and don't start going into all kinds of extraneous bits of information, because it can lead to more confusion. So the mufti should focus on what is being asked and just give answers that is direct to that specific issue. Now, if the mufti does not issue an answer in a particular community, then there needs to be where you can go out to the broad other scholars from other places. And that's why we have many places where they set up what is called fiqh council. In America, we have the fiqh council of North America, in which there's a group of muftis and scholars who gather, and then they are able to provide answers to questions facing American Muslims. And so that becomes their task. If the local mufti is unable to answer or there's not one available, then you have access to the Fiqh Council of North America, in which we can go and we can ask our questions to them, and then they will provide an answer to our issues. A mufti, when he's asked a question, should always be very careful not to be quick in answering. He must make sure he has researched the issue properly, understand its factors, understand the components, understand the evidence, and only then he should reply to his to the question. So the mufti has to be deliberate, because whatever he says, the people will follow it, and he will be held accountable if it was wrong. Because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when you follow the Mufti, you will not be held accountable by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for doing that wrong thing, because you went to one qualified and they gave you the wrong information. Now, very important, if you're not qualified and someone asks you questions, do not presume that you are capable to answer the questions. You know, this happens frequently because all of us are students, and oftentimes we think we really know a lot, and sometimes we may give fatwas or we may give solutions to problems without really having the proper knowledge and skill set to do so. There's a lot of time people will quote a verse of the Quran without understanding the context, and so they will misapply that verse. So you have to be very careful. If you get asked a question and if you don't know, then you really have to make sure that you refer yourself or the person to one who is qualified. If you just answer, then you may be lying about Allah and speaking wrongfully on his behalf. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned, whoever is given a fatwa that has no basis, then his sin will be upon the one who issued that fatwa. So, as I mentioned before, if you were given a fatwa and you committed that fatwa and you end up doing sin, it will be the person who gave it to you that will be punished. The Prophet said, the scholars are the heirs of the prophets. The Prophet have not bequeathed a dinar or dirham. They only bequeath knowledge, and he who acquires it has in fact acquired an abundant portion. So really very important, if you're not qualified, go to people who are qualified. Don't presume that you know. Now, the people who are asking the questions, there's also etiquette, because, you know, a lot of us, we end up in, like, we call fatwa shopping. You know, we don't like the answer for this mufti, so we keep asking the same question 15 different places. It's really important that there's a certain etiquette when you are going to ask the question. Number one, it is your right as a Muslim to have answers to your actions, your statements that you're going to make, your transactions. You have a right to know what is the Islamic position on these matters. So that is why it is the duty of the Mufti to provide answers to you, because it is your right to know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want you to just act in ignorance. And so that is why we have these people in our communities, that they will help us and provide guidance. And you as a believer, always make sure that you understand clearly what is the correctness of the action before you just act without knowledge. Go and ask the Mufti. And we should ask the one who is known to be learned, who is known as a Mufti, who has a reputation or have knowledge. And the intention should be, we are asking this not to go and argue with our brothers and sisters, or to become a person who pretends that they know. The intention has to be that I want to know this because I really want to follow it. I really want to practice it. So when you're making intention of going and ask for answer to your questions, you have to have the intention, I really want to know this because I want to practice it. Not because I want to now use this as a weapon against people who are less ignorant than me. You should also ensure that when you are asking the question, that you provide full disclosure, because the Mufti is going to listen to you and he will take the information you provided and use that as the basis for answering. So the more you can give the context of the background of the question, how it arose, and all the information connected with the question you're asking, that will facilitate the Mufti to be able to properly answer your question. There used to be a question, for example, can Muslims pray? Is Jumu'ah obligatory on Muslims in prison? If you ask that question to someone in America, a Mufti in America, and you ask that question to a Mufti in, say, Saudi Arabia, you will get two different answers. And so it's important to mention the context. Also, the person asking questions should understand the Mufti and have respect for their knowledge and their time, and don't ask useless questions. Don't ask questions which don't yield into any actionable way. You know, questions just for the sake of questions. In the old days, the Muslims used to ask, If Allah had 100th attribute, what would it be? Those kinds of questions, we've got to be able to avoid doing that. One man asked Abu Hanifa, he says, if I'm bathing by a pond, a pool, a river, and I go into the river, which direction should I face in the river? Questions like that. Abu Hanifa says, face the direction where your clothes are, because somebody may steal your clothes. That's the direction you want to face. So don't waste the Mufti's time by asking frivolous questions that have no sense. And we should show respect for the Mufti and their knowledge and their piety. And when you're asking a question, you're not debating the Mufti. A lot of people, the Mufti ask, you ask the Mufti a question, as soon as he begins to answer something, you begin to disagree with them. Don't do that. I was at several nikah this weekend, and one man turned to me and he said, nikah don't mean marriage. What do you do with that? It was an old man, so I had to kind of be respectful. But he's challenging me that, no, this is not so. So don't begin to debate the Mufti. Ask a question and listen to it and be edified and educated. If you have a follow-up question because of what the Mufti may have said, for additional information, you should do that. But we have to be, the ethic of respecting people of knowledge is important. And also it's important to contact the Mufti in a time when you are going to have this attention to the fullest. In the middle of meeting people and suddenly say you tap him on the shoulder, Mufti, I have a question. It's not the appropriate time. He won't have the time to really address it. So you have got to pick the time and the moment that will facilitate the Mufti to give you the best answer and to have full attention to you. Not when he's in the middle of doing something you want to, say Mufti come to a program and then you start overwhelming him. He's in the middle of a program. Well, you may say to him, Mufti, I have a question. What is a good time for me to ask you later? So this is all part of the etiquette of the questioner who asks questions. Now, if you ask a Mufti a question and you don't feel comfortable with the fatwa, that is fine. That is your right to be able to be satisfied with an answer because you're going to be acting upon this. So if you ask one Mufti and you're not satisfied that the answer is complete or you don't feel that he did a proper job, you're perfectly allowed to go ask, if your intention is correct, another Mufti to get a different perspective. But your intention always has to be, I'm looking for something that I can practice, not just trying to see who is more learned than who. Now, if the fatwa that is given to you is clearly incorrect, you perhaps went to the wrong person, and they give you an information that is clearly incorrect, you're not allowed to follow that under any circumstance. If your own personal knowledge, you know that this doesn't make sense, this is incorrect, then you don't go ahead and follow it. And lastly, it is better for the person who has the question to be present physically and say it themselves. If you're going to put somebody else to ask your question, then you have to make sure that they have all the information that you are going to give, that they're articulate enough to represent your question properly, so the Mufti can get all the information needed for that. And so those are some of the etiquettes of the questioner that is, going to ask for these questions. The qualifications of the Mufti. Mufti has to be adil, has to be an adil, the upright person, God conscious, should not be a person that is known to have sinful behavior. The Mufti needs to know the criteria for ijtihad, which is, we did a whole class in ijtihad, independent reasoning by an Islamically qualified expert, and have the ability to derive legal rulings from evidence. The Mufti needs to have an abundance of intelligence and shrewdness and smarts. He needs to be alert, emotionally intelligent, and clear-headed. He should be a person of intentions, knowledge, character, reverence, and tranquility. It is incumbent that he is strong in his area of specialty and independent, and that he has a deep understanding of the people in his community. And the Mufti has to be prepared that when he is not sure about an answer, that he can consult other learned scholars and experts in the field. So you may get someone ask the Mufti a medical question, and the Mufti is not learned in medicine. He's learned in Islam. So he may have to consult a doctor to get a particular aspect of what the question means, because he may not even understand what the person is asking. And so whenever necessary, the Mufti can consult people who are experts in their particular field to help him to better understand what the question is. And so those are some of the qualifications that the Mufti must have. In giving fatwa, there are some methodological guidelines that are important to understand. Number one, Islamic law is based on a clear, transparent methodology that is known to the scholars and to the general public. There is no hidden. I heard one brother, he mentioned that there are certain secret hadith that the Prophet never told much people. We have Islamic law is very clear. It's very detailed. It's very laid out. It's clear and transparent. Secondly, the methodology and the way of arriving at principles. Islam has maxims, principles, axioms. There is a particular process. There's a very scientific, well-organized process that the scholars learn of how to be able to extract evidences from the sources. And this has gone on throughout the Islamic history. The beautiful thing about our religion is that the Prophet has indicated to us that Allah has preserved the ummah from being unified on falsehood. We will not agree completely on falsehood. There will always be a difference. But this is a blessing for the ummah, that Allah will not allow all the scholars to agree on something that is end up being false. Right? We wouldn't have that situation developing. Allah will make sure that some of them is guided to the truth. And the Muslim ummah is protected from collective deviance, that everybody will end up on the wrong path. So we have some balance, and Islam allows that beautiful way in which it balances between being conservative, being extreme, and provide that balance. And the methodology is affirmed and inspired by Allah's word, and thus we have made you a just middle community. So those are some of the guidelines that is important to understand when the Mufti is giving fatwa. Now, one of the things that is important to know is that our religion is understood in a very specific way. And the Muftis and the learned scholars, they all have a particular understanding of the Islamic paradigm, the Islamic faith, the Islamic ideology, that they all use as the basis from which they make fatwa. Right? So these are the foundational information that is assumed to be true by all the Mufti. This is where they go to, and they make an assumption that these are all true. And from that, this group of understanding of Islam, they're able to derive answers to your questions. Number one, the Quran and the authentic Sunnah are the foundational first source of legislation and guidance in our religion. Number two, Islamic guidance is timeless, and it will always be relevant until the Day of Judgment. So this is important, that we don't have guidance that is going to have an expiration date, that the guidance on the Quran and the Sunnah is until Yawmul Qiyamah. That's an assumption that we make and that all the scholars utilize. The Sharia came to achieve worldly and otherworldly interests, and to establish justice and mercy to people. Islam has answers to all modern day questions and challenges. This is done by a process called ijtihad. Islam has a set of moral corpus, foundational values that Islam is based on. These are foundational: speak the truth, keep your promise. There are certain foundational moral values that has been established in our religion that is utilized by all the scholars as the basis for making decisions. And then Islam adopts the methodology of taysir, which means of ease, when it makes fiqh and fatwa. In the fiqh and in the fatwa, there is a process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy, provides ease to the commands. You're traveling in Ramadan, Allah says, okay, postpone your fast. It provides ease for you. If you're traveling, you can shorten your salah. If you're sick, instead of standing for prayer, you can sit and pray. In other words, in every circumstance, Allah changes the regular rules for us and makes things easier based on our situation. So the methodology of Islam is to always find ease for the people. So when the scholar make a fatwa, he's looking to see what it will be. How can I make this solution to be of such that it will be the easiest for people to follow? It will provide comfort and ease to them. Islam has provided a gradual presentation of the message. This is another foundational, these are foundational precepts from which the scholars make decisions. As I said, it's beginning to get boring, I know. So part of what we understand is that there's a gradual way of bringing the message. Even the Quran took 23 years. And so when we are giving fatwas or we're giving, you don't just bring a sledgehammer down on people. Someone accepts Islam, you say, well, tomorrow, 5 salah is due on you. You got to start praying all 5 salah and all of that. And we forget the concept of gradualism, that people have to slowly develop and evolve to become and practice the faith. So there is a gradualism in dawah, in education, in fatwa that is considered. And then Islam balances between materialism and spirituality. If you go one way or the other way, you will end up astray. There are some people in the time of the Prophet ﷺ came and said, I'm going to fast, every day. I'm going to pray all night. What is he trying to do? To become very highly spiritual? The Prophet said, no, you can't do that. You can't become totally material or totally what you call spiritual. No, there's a balance. Prophet say a body has rights upon you. Allah has rights upon you, and we have to balance. So our religion balances between materialism, spiritualism, religious devotion, care for humanity, between emotion and reason, all of that. Islam also recognizes the religious rights of ethnic minorities and the rights of other religion. We're not a faith that goes about and just destroy any other faith other than Islam. We are told that ikraha fid din, everyone is entitled to practice whatever faith they feel best. So Islam recognizes their rights, and that is why you have in Muslim countries where churches are built and people can practice their faith perfectly okay, and Islam does not. In Egypt, it's like 20% are Christians, and they live comfortable with the Egyptian Arabs. Islam recommends the use of intellect and critical thought. We are not a faith that is based on blind faith, where you have to throw away intellect to accept a particular paradigm. We are asked to observe, to reflect, to gather the text, to reason, to have critical thought. This is a very foundational concept in Islam. Islam also calls for fundamental human and social values such as justice, shura, consultation, freedom, dignity, human rights, and dealing with human beings in a moral, impeccable manner. All of this is part of our faith. Islam focuses on family. There's a great emphasis on family. So you'll see some of the fatwas, if you may ask, and they will be a bias towards the establishment of family, because this is part of the teachings of Islam. Focus on the family unit as the first pillar in establishing a righteous society. And then Islam promotes the concept of ummah. This is and believes that the obligation of unity, that we must all strive to make one ummah. The part of the responsibility of the people who believe in Islam is that they must strive to establish an ummah, one body that is united. Islam promotes religious and ethnic identity. cultural and political pluralism, and the necessity to coexist between different civilizations and working together in the best interest of humanity. So our faith does not allow us to just wantonly, just do things. In fact, when the Muslims were being persecuted, the Prophet ﷺ sent some to a Christian king, Najashi, said that you will be safe there under a Christian king. So Islam recognizes that there are people who can be just and good. And so he trusted that king with the lives of Muslims who migrated there. Islam respects legitimate scholarship and has a healthy tradition of having difference of opinion. It's called ikhtilaf, in which you have different channels and people are allowed to discuss and disagree without being disagreeable, without fighting each other, that we can agree to disagree. And Islam has a great tradition, a legal tradition that comes from almost 1400 years. And so that tradition is documented. It's there. There are case studies, there are scenarios that scholars use as a basis for making their fatwas. So all of these are basic foundational concepts about Islam that when the scholars go to make a fatwa, these are some of the things that they are using as the basis for their decision. Now, there are others. So these are some other things that the Mufti will use before he arrives at his decision. Number one, adopting the methodologies of the rightly guided scholars of the past, and by consensus that the previous scholars of the past, if they have a consensus on a particular issue, the Mufti will make sure that they check that and be able to use that as a basis of ruling. All right. Number two, you regarding the Quran and Sunnah as the two main sources of legislation for fiqh and fatwa. Also, there are other sources in the Quranic sciences, Hadith sciences, principles of Quranic tafsir, science of the Arabic language, Arabic rhetoric. They all are regarded, as part of that. Quran and Sunnah as the two main sources, but they have all of these subsets. Adopting the principle of greater objectives that the scholars have agreed upon. So in making decision, we will err or we will be biased towards decisions that will provide the greater fulfillment of the greater objectives to people. Adopting the methodology of Taysir, we mentioned that before, requiring that the fatwa be in accordance with the principles of greater objectives. Adopting the principle of ijtihad. Ijtihad have several subcategories to it. And as I mentioned, we did a class in ijtihad. So part of that, the scholars, they use ijtihad as the main basis for making decisions. And so among that is one, ijma, consensus must be followed. Right? There's a well-known principle that says their consensus is a definite proof and their disagreements is a source of great mercy. So among the scholars, consensus is proof and disagreement among the scholars is a mercy. Not among the non-scholars. Disagreement among non-scholars is fitna and confusion. Disagreement among scholars, upon people who are qualified, Allah has called it a source of mercy because then they can debate and they can come up with better solutions. Part of ijtihad is you have to use secondary sources as well, which is qiyas, which is analytical deduction, and urf, taking the culture of the people into consideration. When you're making your suggestion of a solution, you have to always think about the cultural norms of the people who are going to be practicing this particular fatwa that you have, and you must take that into consideration. Public interest as well. Istislah, juristic preferences, blocking and opening means. So there are several considerations they make. And then using the fiqh of maqasid, so we think about the objectives of why, for example, if there's a particular hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when we are going to discuss it, we're not going to just literally say the Prophet says don't do this, then we're going to say that means we don't do that. We have to ask, why did the Prophet say that this is prohibited? And then once we are on the objective of it, now we could take that objective and say, okay, based on that principle, here is a ruling. Instead of just literally just saying the Prophet said don't do this, and we just follow it blindly. We have to figure out what are the objectives, why the Prophet made that ruling. Then there is the issue of context, which we talked about, that you have to understand the context in which this is going to be applied. There is the issue of matching application to context. So whenever you have a ruling, there may be a context that is not in the moment there, so the ruling can't be operational until that context comes into place. Using the fiqh of muwazzanat, which refers to legal comparison of benefits and harms. So we've got to consider both. This fatwa of mine, how much harm is going to cause. This fatwa is how many benefit is going to cause. So I'm going to match between if it's more harmful or it's more beneficial to do. And I could give you a quick example. For example, in COVID, for example, we had so many fatwas that was given. One of it was that when you go to the masjid, you must pray 6 feet apart from each other. Now you have to consider, is it beneficial or is it harmful? So if the harm outweighs the benefit, because we are told that when you pray, you have to stand up close to each other, and now our scholars are saying, pray 6 feet apart. Now, when they are making this fatwa, they have to consider many factors. Number one, if I pray 6 feet apart, then the masjid is not going to hold the people. Because if each of us standing 6 feet apart, very quickly a couple of us will fill out the whole masjid. So the scholars have to think about that. If we say 6 feet apart, how are we inconveniencing the community that has only small masjids and putting them through? We have to make further suggestions of how they can cater for that. And so when they're considering harms and benefits, these are some of the things they do. Then they have to think about outcomes and how different outcomes are connected. The decision over here and the decision over there, are they going to affect each other? Then they have to think about the political climate and the things that will affect government and its public interests. Then there is fatwas that they have to consider exceptions to the rule. So you have the rule and then there are certain exceptions. For example, if you have no food, then there's an exception. You can eat some pork, which is normally disallowed. But if you are dying and in order for you to live, this is the only thing that will keep you alive further, it's an exception, then you're allowed to take some pork and eat just enough to survive. So those are rules and exceptions they have to consider as well. And then the gradual application. And then they have to also be mindful that if a fatwa that is given, we need to know that sometimes there's a fatwa that is given that is only suitable for a particular set of circumstance. And if that circumstance change, the fatwa no longer is valid. You have to go for a new fatwa. That happened in COVID. We had fatwas given to us, but it was presumed that this is only going to be applied based on the COVID environment. And when that environment disappears and it becomes less dangerous, then this fatwa no longer is valid. So oftentimes the Mufti will explain, this is valid only because of these sort of factors, this context, this situation. Once these are no longer present, then this fatwa no longer applies. So fatwas are not permanent. They can change and become obsolete. And then we have to, in giving fatwas, the scholars are also, the muftis are also aware of the etiquettes of disagreement and how you properly understand when people disagree, understanding the fiqh of minorities as well. They also have to take into consideration that you are not living in a major Muslim country. And so some of the rules that a Muslim majority country may apply may not apply for you because you have a particular set of circumstances. Some of the fatwas that came down in terms of owning a house with riba, was done by some of the scholars. They said, well, since you're entitled to own a home and you live in a non-Muslim environment where it's not possible for you to get a home without involving in riba, some of them give fatwas like that. So taking into consideration the minorities, you're a minority and you have to coexist in a Muslim majority, a non-Muslim majority country, all of that is taken by the muftis when they give answers. And ensuring also that the decisions they make will not yield to conflict with the majority of the country, of the majority of the people who are not Muslims. So they have to also understand how the impact will be of this decision in terms of the relationship between Muslims and non-Muslims. They have to avoid extremism in a particular mazhab. A mufti may have a particular mazhab that they practice individually. He has to be careful not to impose just the opinions of that mazhab on the person asking the question, who may not even belong to that mazhab. And so extremism in your particular mazhab, the mufti has to make sure he doesn't fall into that trap. And he has to distinguish, as we mentioned, between general circumstances and special circumstances. And he has to clarify the fatwa in terms of being very specific about culture and all of that. And there are some times when fatwas need change. For example, if change of time passes, that fatwa no longer becomes available. Where the circumstance changes, as we mentioned before. Sometimes location, the change of a location may change a fatwa. Change of a societal custom may cause the fatwa to become obsolete. Or the hardship level of the people changed. In the time of Umar ibn Khattab, he suspended chopping the hands of people off because people needed food and they had to steal it. So the ruling about stealing became suspended because the general hardship of the people. And then situations where necessity may cause a particular fatwa to no longer be applicable. We need a new ruling because of the situation that is presented. And so all of these things are taken into consideration by our scholars. And I want you to really get an appreciation for what our scholars go through in trying to provide answers for you. And so we have thousands of new things that is happening every day. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has indeed blessed our ummah with people who are so learned that they have been up to the task of providing answers to the ummah and to the Muslim community so far. No matter what has come, our scholars have had answers for them. Because we believe that Allah has brought this last deen and it has answers until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And He has left with us learned people who will find those answers until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And so far, as of today, we may have some new issue in which the scholars have not made final decisions on. All right, we have all of those fatwas they give: transgenderism, moon sighting, bitcoins, organ transplantation. There's one in which they haven't made a full decision on as yet. They're still studying it. It's about lab meat, meat grown in labs, whether it's halal or haram. There's discussion, and they have made a tentative decision on marijuana. So many, Yawm Nabi, we have different fatwas that is given based on that. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our muftis and scholars, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and allow us the privilege to access them and to ask them about our religion and about things which may be bothering us. Don't just sit alone and think you can just Google it and you will get an answer. A lot of times you Google something and you get one perspective. And so be careful, just don't act upon one opinion. Make sure you go to a learned person whom you trust, and you trust that not that they're the most learned people, but that they will ensure that they do due diligence, that if they don't know, they will go and find the right people to get the answer to bring back to you. As for myself, I don't consider myself a very learned person, but if you ask me questions, I will answer what I can, and then I will promise you to go and ask a more learned person. I have access to many, many learned persons that I can get varying opinions on, that I can come back to you and say, hey, here is the answer to that question. But in no way would I ever, not knowing it, make up something or pretend that I know. I will tell you plain, I don't know the answer to this, but I have access to many, many learned people that I can go and ask, highly qualified people who will give me, who I trust with their piety and their knowledge, and who will come back and give me an answer. Assalamu alaikum.